Hi everybody. Oh man, nice group. I do not use a mic. If you can't hear me, move up. Pretend it's church. My name is Colin. I am a artist, animator, game designer, and I've been doing this since 1982. I was a filmmaker in college, live action films, and then did an animated film because I could draw a little bit, and things that I drew were easier to control than other college students. So won a lot of awards, and I answered an ad one day for the Bally Midway company. I got out of school, I started my own little ad agency. I'm doing ads for bars and restaurants and stuff like that, but I answered an ad at the Bally Midway company because I got a pen and ink style. Obviously, they needed an animator, which didn't make sense because they're a pinball company. And I went in and they said, no, we want you to do art for video games. And I'm like, what? You mean like Pac-Man? Really? People do that? And so I was very polite. I told them that I had a successful ad agency. It's not that I didn't want the job, but they were going to have to pay me, at least $300 a month. And George Gomez says, yeah, I think we can do better than that. And so they hired me, and when I got the call, I choked up. I literally did, because they said they were going to pay me an incredible $13,000 a year. And I was at a wedding with some friends, and I hung up the phone. I tried to make a joke. I said, this is it. Childhood's over. I've got a real job. And man, was I wrong. In every respect, it has never been anything like a real job, and it has, prolonged childhood for 37 more years. First game they put me on was to animate the characters, the art in Discs of Tron, and the designer programmer on that was a guy named Bob Dinnerman, and he was a perfectionist. And within a couple of days, I was hooked. With regular film animation, you're drawing for weeks, you're filming in the animation stand for nights and nights on end, you're sending it away, you get it back, you see your mistakes. It's a month-long process just to see your first thing. In this video game world, I maybe only had 16 colors, but I'm doing it in the morning and I'm seeing it work in front of me in the afternoon. It's in the game by the end of the day. So I was hooked. And the best thing was I'm there for days. And this game is out on test. I don't know what's going on yet, in this industry or what my role is really, but it's not making any money yet. Sorry. It's not making any money yet. And I said, the gameplay is great, but how about if we, I just changed the art. So I created a little green character and called him Cosmic Cruiser, and they said, sure, why not? Back in those days, we were all figuring things out. They had us in a little place outside the main factory. Management left us alone. We were like, guys in Animal House, except we all cared. So we were all helping each other, and all of us gave each other the freedom to do whatever we want. One of the games I did while I was doing Discs of Tron, while I was doing Cosmic Cruiser, I pulled up I said, where do the ideas come from? Well, there's a stack of papers here, and I saw something for something called Ant Raid, where you're controlling a bunch of characters. And I said, we're not doing that because it look ugly. Let's make it cartoony. 2 days later, they had a programmer assigned to it. So the point here that I'm making is that it was an incredible time where they left us alone. I don't know if it was out of their wisdom or just because they haven't figured out the corporate thing yet. One of the games I'm working on, while I'm working on these other games with people, was a game in which they had left the guy in a back room. Tom Leone was a programmer, and he had this driving game that was kind of basically just Galaga, but you're driving this car and you're shooting, and it's okay, you had to avoid those things. And every animator, there were about 3 of us artists at that time, 4 actually, got to contribute. And we'd go back there and hang out with the guy, and bit by bit, you're adding things to the game, you're creating, no, we can do boats, Tom, we can do this. The game became Spy Hunter, and right there you can see, back in the day, we had to hide our names, because none of us were designers. No. You're an artist, you're a programmer, you're this. Management was very clear about that. So we had to hide our names, our initials in the cabinet art. or in the high score pages. It was such a collaborative time, and I'm talking about the early, the Bally Midway days I know. I think of them as the early days, beginning in 1982. I'm working on games. Animators were lucky. We got to work on virtually everything. Like some games, there was only one animator, like this of Tron, but other games, like Spy Hunter, multiple people are working on. And the nice thing about the new laptop, my finger hasn't memorized where stuff is yet. I got to work with all the programmers, so you got to find out what worked and what didn't work. This guy says, let's try this, no, that don't work. Let's try this, no, that don't work. That's not as much fun as somebody who's got a plan so you're doing it once. You know you're going to change stuff, but it's better to have a battle plan. And you learn how you have to motivate, because everything was peer-to-peer. Nobody was anybody's boss. You had to get the programmer on board, though, because he was the guy really deciding what was going. You might decide what it's going to look like. You either surprise him, you impress him, you cajole, you beg, you intimidate, depending on who you're working with. And working on a game that's never going to come out is nothing I wanted to do. So you start realizing that a design would be a good idea. So I became a designer basically out of self-defense because I'm lazy, because I don't want to do things twice. And working with guys, this is the first time I worked with a programmer named Jeff Nauman. We did Demo Derby. All I did on that was a few special effects and some cute girls between the rounds. The next game was a tank game. And I said, hey, remember that game Ant Raid that we did that didn't make it, but I like the idea of controlling multiple characters, so let's do a helicopter and a tank. He went on board, we did that game, it did pretty well. So slowly, bit by bit, I'm learning how to design. After Sarge, but I wasn't allowed to do anything other than the screen art for the most part. The downstairs, the pinball guys would do the cabinet art, like or the brochures for Sarge, and they didn't do quite justice to what I would have done. But hey, it was great. I was getting paid. I was having fun. I had no idea I was. Had no idea I was in the center of the American video game universe. I was just a guy who stumbled into this. Zwackery was the first time they let me design a game. And even though no one was called a designer, we had this game ready for production, and they're showing Nolan Bushnell through the offices, and management comes walking by, and they come up to the game, and they go, this is Zwackery, this is going out to the show this week, and this is the designer, Brian Colin. I about crapped my pants. It was just like, I was delighted. I argued with Nolan for the next 40 minutes about what we should do with the game, but it was a fun time overall, and I went out and changed my business cards the very next day. Now, not everything that I touch turns to gold, okay? This was a game in which the player was a bikini-clad, boomerang-throwing cave woman riding on a giant red watermelon seed-eating pterodactyl who would spit the seeds at giant invisible killer bees. Oh, and I'm not sure why it didn't work. Okay? But it was fun. We were trying to push the hardware. The hardware was always an issue. I came back from a show and I wanted to do bigger characters so I could show comedy, so I could get my art across a little better. And they said, no, we cannot animate. We cannot animate backgrounds. We don't have we can't. They don't scale. They don't scroll. You can animate a rectangle, Brian. What are you going to do with an animating rectangle? So I turned to Sharon and I said, so a building falling into itself, that's an animating rectangle. And now what knocks down buildings? Big creatures, so I can do big creatures and double up and show comedy. And we knew we had a great game. We went and grabbed a programmer, we got a couple other people, we all signed up. We knew we had the best game in the world. First, that's me, my wife, and programmer Jeff Nauman there. So if you ever want to know who my favorite character is, if my wife's in the room, I'll say Lizzie, but you know who it really is. And that's the original design team. Back in the day, and I haven't aged a day, which is amazing. But we knew, the first line of the design document said, the story of Rampage, or why this is, oh, there it is. This is next year's #1 game. We went to our boss, and he said, no, I want Jeff to be doing something else. And so I went right over his head, went to the VP. I said, here's why this is going to earn money. I agree. No, because you can't eat people, and you can't eat police, and you can't eat the army. So I went over his head to the top 3 guys. They all said no, no, and no. Jeff and I went and started proving out the concept that we could replace these background blocks and make it look like these things was falling. And anyway, in the midst of our other stuff going on, and then by an amazing coincidence, happenstance, all 3 top guys at Bally Midway were fired. And they brought in the head of what used to be Montgomery Ward's retail, Maury Furchin. First day, he says, addressing the troops, he says, don't worry, everything's going to be great. There's that finger. And he said, I've got an open door policy. So you know who was waiting outside his door at 8:59 the next morning. He signed off on it. It broke every earnings record for an arcade game up to that time. I was delighted, and the best thing about it for me was this was the first game where they let me do everything. They let me do the cabinet art finally. So they didn't let me do that brochure. But got to do the cabinet art, got to do the screen art, everything about it. And then we knew we didn't have that much in the game because we were really pushing the limit, but we named all the cities after cities in the U.S. So we went to the head of marketing and said, you're going to send out a press release with, dear Peoria, dear Seattle, dear Moose Jaw, your town is about to be destroyed. And what did he say? No. So I wrote these, and again, this is way back. I wrote these press releases and sent them all over the country, and then generated hundreds of newspaper articles, TV promotions, everything else, which was kind of unheard of back in the day. It was not quite as social media didn't exist. I was literally writing and these things to all these different newspapers. It did well. We had fun with it. For a lot of reasons, it is my tipping point game. Around this same time, I'm still working on multiple games at the same time. Around this same time, I'm working on, they were starting to do Laserdisc games, and they bought Astron Belt, a couple of horrible things that were just video on top of movies being the background, and I'd heard about Dragon's Lair, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm a filmmaker. I can do, I went to the head of engineering and said, I can do an interactive hour-long film that people can play like a text adventure game except live action. Give me a budget. They gave me a budget, albeit small. And I couldn't afford actors, so I got volunteers out of Chicago's extra community. I could afford an abandoned mental institution, 13-story abandoned mental institution in downtown Chicago that was falling apart, that had electricity but no heat in the coldest coldest February on record. Literally, we're filming in there one afternoon, this scene actually, with Sharon. That's the girl that put the bow on Ms. Pac-Man, by the way. One of the other artists, but we're filming and one of the camera guys yells, cut. They were all volunteers from my old college who got school credit for coming up for the semester. What do you mean cut? Brian, it's snowing. We're inside. He's like, Brian, it's snowing. The lights, after repeated takes, our breath condensed on the ceiling. When they turned the lights on to do the shot, it would melt and turn back to snow before it hit the ground. I kid you not. That's how cold it was. Just when we finished editing this, Bally got out of the video industry because laserdisc industry because they had released a game called NFL Football on a video disc which has a needle. You know what happens when you put a video game laserdisc with a disc with a needle in as a video game? First time it gets bumped, it turns into a $4,000 doorstop. So Bally got in a lot of trouble with this, and this went back and stayed in the 16 millimeter cans in my basement. until 2 years ago, and we'll come to that later. So it sat there forever. Around that same time, too, I started a game that was going to be a pyramid exploration game, and a new programmer got assigned to it. He's like, yeah, I like the gameplay, but I'm a science fiction guy, so I had just seen Aliens, and it's like, okay, Xenophobe it is. So we turned it into Xenophobe. This was a unique game. If you guys have ever seen the arcade version especially, it's a few days before test, and the guy who's designing the cabinet hadn't given us the cabinet yet. I'd already done the art to the specs and everything else. Just a few days before we went out on test, he wheels up this incredible, gorgeous, unique cabinet with the negative. I think there's a picture. There it is. There's the cabinet. It was so cool for the arcade back in the days. It blew me away. Still my favorite cabinet of any I've ever done. And again, I got to do the art for that. I got to do stuff for the manual. This was an absolute wonderful period back in the day, Bally Midway. They had their own things going on, but I was clueless. My job was coming up with something, pushing the hardware farther than anybody thought it could go. I mean, this had these things scrolling back and forth. That hardware didn't scroll. We figured out a way to fake it. You know, they wanted a 3-player game, and I wanted an interactive, going back to my computer game roots, Zork. I wanted something where you could pick up this and use it somewhere else. I'd done that in the game Swackery. I did this in here, but mainly this was a shoot 'em up. You're just smacking that button as fast as you can, doing what you can do. So, I'm going to take a drink. One of the best things was those last 6 weeks, because we were a production facility, we were making something. If we didn't hit a deadline, people I knew were getting laid off that week. So if we wanted to add stuff, and you always want to add stuff, you're working from an 8-hour day to a 10-hour day to a 12-hour day till up all night long for weeks on end. Because the end of that process, it's out on test. And that was my favorite part of the process, because now I'm literally standing in the back of an arcade, staring at little kids. I've got to find a better way to say that. Watching players' faces as they're groaning in pain, as they're laughing out loud, and more importantly, as they're reaching for that next quarter. Because that's the other part of the discipline. Players want to live forever. The guys that buy these machines want them dead in 30 seconds, and we had to make them both happy. So we learned tricks like, okay, shrink them down naked. I didn't want to kill anybody in Rampage, so we shrunk them down naked. But then we made it so, well, you can eat them before they get off the screen. Doesn't sound like a big thing working on too many levels. It's funny, but you know where it works? I don't want this guy next to me to eat me. I'm digging in my pocket as fast as I can to shove in that next quarter so I don't get eaten and lose my score. So those little things like that kept the money going. That's my wife and I. Don't know why I showed them. But that one always makes me lose my train of thoughts. This was a game I did, Max RPM, which was, we faked a forward-scrolling thing, not very well, but again, using that same hardware. A lot of times the challenge was not just about coming up with something fun and something funny. For me, it was, what can we make this hardware do? Because that's all we got to work with. Excuse me, right around, this is all of us saying goodbye, waving to Bally Midway. We were bought by our biggest competitor, Williams Electronics. And at that time, I was about halfway done with this game, with Jeff Nauman. And myself and Jeff were the only 2 video game designers they kept. So they bought the company. We were 3/4 of the way through this. We finished this game, and I was told by a Williams Bally Midway executive that the sales from this game paid for the buyout. I don't know if that's true or not, but I love retelling that story because it was told to me. So we did Arch Rivals. It did very well. And again, this game, another one of my favorite examples, it's a period-based game, so at the end, when the time runs out on the clock, the game stops, right, for your next quarter. No, we let you keep playing until that basketball is right there. Next time, it's right above the hoop. that's when we stop the game. Now, are you going to reach for another quarter to find out whether it goes in or not? Little dirty tricks like that. I mean, I love. Our follow-up game to that, we were going to do like an NFL arch rivals, but Williams already had a football game in the works, so we chose rugby, and we chose rugby with battle axes and Till of the Hun versus Vikings. We had a lot of fun with this one. Learned a valuable lesson on this one too. Right before it went out, it was during test, doing very well on test. I got the bright idea of, this was a period-based game too. It's like, you know what? If we let them prepay, they can pay for the whole game cheaper. You know, like get that money in advance. Great idea. Except we put it in during the last week of test. And it goes out there into the world, and it's earning like this, and it's going like that. It's earning like this, it's going like that. Finally, about 2 months after it's out, we got to the root of the problem. When someone prepaid while someone else was buying in, the game played for free until it was turned off or unplugged again. And, you know, we fixed it right away, sent out new EPROMs to anyone, but by then the damage was done. And the sales of that one, I think, would have surpassed Arch Rivals. But you go out there and shoot yourself in the foot. You got no one to blame but yourself. And this is how we learn. These are valuable lessons. Don't change things at the end. After Pigskin, for about a year, EA had been asking me to come work for them, and I was very flattered, but it's like, well, now we're working now at the new Midway, which is, to my eyes, was still Williams. And finally, I didn't want to move to California, and they didn't want to let me be an employee here. A remote employee was unheard of. So finally they said, well, what if we gave you the money to start your own company? Yeah, I think we could do that. So we started Game Refuge, myself and Jeff Nauman. We left Midway on good terms. We got on a train, because I'd been taking trains for years, and Jeff, so he decided we would go out to EA together, and he got on the train, and I've got my books and everything else, and he's got one cassette tape, turned it over, and then an hour and a half out of the city. He's like, okay, 40 more hours of this. So he never took the train again after that, but we went out there and pitched them General Chaos. Fingers crossed, player controls a squad of unique characters, which, if I'd gone into detail earlier, that was pretty much what Ant Raid was. There was ants fighting over garbage in a dump. They liked the idea. We went ahead with it. It was their #1 non-licensed game that year. It was the reason the 4-player controller was created for the Genesis. So we immediately started on a sequel of that, Major Snafu, and then another game, it was called Plunder, and it was exploration in a Egyptian tomb kind of game. And EA decided to open an arcade division. So those games were just, okay, we're done with that. We're going to put you on this arcade division. The arcade division led off with Madden football, which everybody already owned, and we begged them not to. Their arcade division was closed before we even got our first game done. But you can see that game, RC Squared at the Galloping Ghost, the last one remaining in the world. Around that time, we were doing stuff with Midway again, and they said, we need a game to appeal. We've got, Mortal Kombat's got our 14-year-old male covered. We need something for everybody else. I never wanted to do a sequel, but we looked at each other and said, let's remake Rampage. Rampage World Tour then gave us the ability to put tons of hidden stuff in it that we couldn't squeeze into that original Rampage, because we were pushing against the box in those days. Rampage World Tour did great as an arcade game. Again, it was a remake, not really a sequel. We, created more characters, deeper background, I mean, you can go to hell and eat Hitler in this game. You can go to Area 51, you can go to that hidden government warehouse where they store the Ark of the Covenant. We put a ton of hidden stuff in there. There's like a 15-page manual of the hidden stuff in that game. Which actually I'm illustrating right now. Hopefully I'll have it out next year. But Rampage World Tour did very well for them, and then did very well at home. And people always ask about home games because, and I just should say, I have nothing to do with ports. I get them, I look at them, I say, oh wow, yeah, they did it. Oh, I wish I'd done the art that cool. I love the Arch Rivals, the port of the Arch Rivals. They used the Mad Magazine art and stuff. But I digress. Cosplay was a thing. There's, you know, a handsome young guy. I will point out, when you're trying to do promotional stuff and you're doing it on your own, demo derby is a good idea. Don't paint your car up to look really cool, because every other car descends on it first, and you are the first one off the track. Okay, I'm going to pause here, and while this isn't the end of our coin-op days, we're our own company now. We're Game Refuge. We're doing casino games. We're doing touchscreen games for Merit. We did some 3D stuff with them that the year we did it, it quadrupled their sales. This was a tremendous game, I will say this. We've done a lot of advert games over the years. This we did for Komatsu, and they came to us and wanted a little top view Nintendo. This is what it ended up being. They ran it from 2006 to 2011 at their conventions every year. People would line up by the hundreds and watch 6 people play at a time. And the challenge, creative challenge of this, talking from a design aspect, was they came to us and said, okay, this has got to be for people, these are construction people. We want to see our products, so the drivers are driving, and they said, but we want a race game, but it's got to be realistic, it's got to look realistic, and the trucks can't touch, and they have a top speed of 4 miles an hour. So I said, okay, we can do this, and I showed them, you know, the kind of graphics they were going to have, and they signed on. We're partially through the project a bit, and in a meeting, I'm showing them that we went downhill to add speed because of gravity. You guys okay with that? Yeah, we're okay with that. All right, they're doing about 250 miles an hour at the end, and these 40-ton dump trucks are doing rolls and flips. But by the time they saw it, they loved it. And then the other thing that we had to kind of work around with the client was, I just got to ask, you know, we're about halfway through, why don't you want the trucks to touch? Well, we don't want the paint to scratch. I think we can handle it. I think we can handle it. And then the final thing was, and remember, the people playing this don't play video games. They're middle-aged. They're drunk. And it's like, okay. So, and that was one of the most fun things about designing this is these trucks. It was you can go anywhere. This is your suggested way down this hill. But you want to take off over that hill? We made it so they could go anywhere, do anything, roll these trucks. They would roll back onto their wheels again, start up again. Part of the fun of this was making it, for lack of a better term, so idiot-proof that anybody could sit and play it and have a ball. And again, by the end, they're all laughing. They're all drunk, but they're all laughing. And then people are watching their friends on those monitors that were up high. As a businessman, I have a very simple model. You come to me and you have money, we'll see whether or not I can bring something to the table. But Arctic Stud is one of the few games we designed to own, and this is one of those, almost like Patooey Louie. This is full contact poker on rocket sled snowmobiles, a land game in a Cthulhu Mythos reality in which the sponsor is a beer distributor that uses the excrement of the goblin workers he has for the main ingredient for the beer. Hysterical game, and unfortunately you can't play it on anything past Windows 7. But it's just you're driving over a 9 square mile area, picking up cards. You can see on your radar whether someone else has a card you can need. You can hunt him down, or you can put a bounty on him. They blow him up, blow up his sled. You can go steal his cards. It's ridiculous. It's my favorite game of any game I've ever done, and I think it only sold like 100,000 copies. And it was in one of those little bins, you know, bargain bin is when it was straight to bargain bin kind of game, but it's a really cool game. And I can talk about the next 27 years, but I'm going to take a break here, and maybe we want to ask questions. I can jump ahead to, and you guys can tell me, do we want to jump ahead and talk about the Rampage movie? Do we want to talk about Star Trek Voyager, some of these later arcade games, or the Death Stalker? We can't play it, unfortunately, Death Stalker, because it looks like can't get the audio to work. And the audios have the charm. But let me take a break. And if you've got any questions, shoot your hands up. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about your work on Spy Hunter?
My work personally on Spy Hunter was minimal. My work was, I did the missiles, I did some of the smoke effects. I came up with the idea for some of the effects. The guy with the shotgun out the window that comes up and shoots you, that was in response to the fact that, I mean, if this is too granular, let me know, but we couldn't let you die until you pulled on the road. So anybody that's played the arcade knows you can run up the side as long as you want and go, hey, I may not be scoring, but I'm not dying either. We had to pull up, create this limo, so let's bring up a guy with a shotgun who comes out and blows you away because you haven't pulled on the road yet. So it was design stuff more than art. Yes, all the way in the back.
So I'm a little confused. Does Rafferty ever get like a full commercial release? And if it did...
Excellent question. Excellent question. Swackery, about 3 weeks before it was supposed to go on test, the head of engineering said, hey, I've got this new hardware upgrade that he was trying to get the money through for, and he had 175 of these new prototypes set up. He said, Swackery is going to be released on this. The good news is all of your background can be high res. And I'm like, well, the game is, this 9-month development is done. And okay, I'll make the character set high res, that's all I got time to do. So it went out on a much more expensive hardware that was a one-off, and he had 176 of them, and that's how many they released. There were 176 released. There's maybe a dozen around in the country right now that I know of. There are very few, very few. And I'm kicking myself for selling mine. Yeah?
What do you see as the future of Colin operating games?
I'm the wrong guy to ask. I am the wrong person to ask about the future of anything. I predicted cable is going to fail because no one needs more than 5 channels. The internet is a fad. Heck, I predicted, beta over VHS. I stumbled into this industry. I have had a ball. I have been blessed, but I am the wrong guy to. If you come to me with a problem or an audience or a box and say, we want to push the limits of this, I'm the guy to talk to. But you better know where you want to sell it and who you want to sell it to and everything else. I'm going to make you happy. I'm going to make you a hit. If left to my own devices, I'd come up with Patooey Louie and Arctic Studs. So. Yeah.
Kind of related to that, you mentioned Voyager. How different is the process when there's a pre-established concept and you get to adapt it versus something you get to design up?
That was a fun one. Again, someone came to us and said, we've got the rights to this, make a game out of it. House of the Dead model type thing, but I wanted to do a lot of hidden paths. So anything you shoot in there, you can play that game 45 minutes start to finish 10 different times and see 10 different paths every time. We're out at Paramount. Paramount was great. Their front office, I wanted to do original characters, not just the ones from the shows. We had our own alien races in it and everything else. And we're out there one day, just kind of sneaking around the set and in the dark, and myself, the producer, and one of my team members, one of the lead animators, and we around the corner, this angry, cigar-chomping LeVar Burton. What are you guys doing here? You don't belong. And the producer's mute. He's like this, and and he is just glaring. And gosh, I love him. Ben Nauman, the lead animator on that. LeVar, I loved episode 236 when you directed blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, angry LeVar melted away, and I'm looking at the guy from Reading Rainbow who's happily showing us around. We'll take your time, and this is this, and this is this. It's like, that's why you need a good Trekkie on your team, always. And I think they tell me it's quarter 2, so we're about out of time. Any else we want to squeeze in?
Yeah, just what involvement did you have with the new Rampage movie? And if you didn't have any, did you enjoy it?
I did. I'm going to put this up. even though we're out of time. Royalties? No, I was an employee. And they did shoot a cameo. They did, let's start it there and go like this. Okay. That was the original development team, myself and my coworkers. This is the movie development team. I contacted them early, never heard anything. Someone in Chicago when a casting company knew of me, invited me out to be an extra. I was an extra a couple of weeks while I'm doing that. The assistant director and first unit director found out about me, said, let's do a cameo. Spent the afternoon running away from the Sears Tower, falling behind me, imaginary. I get a call a few weeks later from one of the producers who says, I've been wanting to call you for a long time, but because you were just an employee, I couldn't, but I knew of you. But now that you're in the movie, you want to come down and meet everybody? Can we fly you down to the studio and meet everybody? I said, sure, I'm willing to do that. You know, it's like, it was fantastic. They were wonderful. I'm geeking out all over the place. I got taken through how the script developed, how they kept the heart in it. I'm taking a picture with the producers at the end of the evening. I'm going home, and all of a sudden they're filming behind me, and all of a sudden I hear, you know, stop, I got to be part of this. The Rock and Naomi Harris come running down. I'm flipping out. He is incredibly nice. He is nice, or nicer than everybody says he is. I'm geeking out over him. He was a fan apparently as a kid. He's geeking out over me. It was incredible. I was grinning like a 12-year-old. I mean, this is, you know, when I was doing the extra work, this is me actually doing my scene, running behind the camera mounted on the car and everything else. And I got a call from a friend then 2-3 months before the movie came out saying, I just saw a test screening. You're huge. You're on the screen. The Sears Tower, Willis Tower is coming down behind you. It's so great. I got invited to the premiere. My wife and I go out there. We're sitting there, and it's like, okay, here it comes. So at the after party, producer John Ricard comes up to me and goes, I'm really sorry, but the Warner Brothers came in 3 weeks ago and made us cut out 30 minutes of Easter eggs, so you ended up on the cutting room floor. Well, they interviewed me on one of the DVDs, so at least I got that. But it was a ball. The short version is it was a ball, and like I said, my cheeks, my dimples met at the top of my head. I kid you not. And with that, guys, I gotta go. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, everybody. Come by and see me. Come by and see me out there.